Be sure to take laughter wherever you go. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Last Night on Earth Batman. In a dystopian future, Bruce Wayne wakes up in Arkham Asylum. He still has his youth, but he was never Batman. Bruce dons the bat cowl, breaks out of the asylum, and accompanied by Joker's animated severed head, begins a surreal journey to solve the mystery of his past and find out who's responsible for destroying the world. Encountering both friends and enemies along the way, the Dark Knight's quest through the devastated landscape may prove to be his last adventure ever. While Bruce is starting his quest to learn of his past, we're going to go ahead and get this review underway. But before we get this review underway, we're going to first figure out how tall Last Night on Earth Batman stands. Taking the tape measure to the very top of his head. Reading the readouts to you, the members of the mob, you're looking at the figure standing 7.1 inches in height. We can switch that to centimeters, revealing that Last Night on Earth Batman stands just over 18 centimeters tall. Let's get some size comparisons going. We can bring in the Wonder Woman that we just had a look at, pardon my hairy arm. And we can also have a look at the Omega that we looked at just before that. While the Omega and the Batman are the same size to one another, they're obviously a lot smaller. Not too small, but just a little hair smaller than Wonder Woman, who is the tallest of the three. Obviously, in this part of this review, I didn't bring in the Scarecrow just because the Scarecrow would be taller than all of them, but not so much by the doings of his own legs, because obviously he's missing his legs. Sorry, Scarecrow. But of course, he had to rely on that display stand, and we'll bring him back in when we compare all the other figures, once we build ourselves the Bane. Speaking of building ourselves the Bane, Batman comes included with the last crucial pieces in order to finish ourselves Bane. He comes included with both two fists, as well as the head for Bane. Now, of course, to do this, we're going to go ahead and bring in the Bane that we had a look at before. And through the series of reviews that we've been doing, we've been somewhat successful building the Bane. Let's just get his feet to straighten out a little bit. There we go. Yeah, you can see so far what's missing are those last little icings, the last little sprinkles of parsley. We're going to go ahead and have to add the arms, and we're going to go ahead and have to add the head as well to finish off the Bane. I didn't end up having to rely, I know if you watched my review, the last review that I did on Wonder Woman, I didn't end up having to submerge the pegs for the arms. All I really just did was, I just bent the peg as straight as I could get. So basically, if the arm was going this way, and I just used a whole lot of force to get that in place. But at least the arms are a little bit more stable, I would say, staying in place. I'm still not really sure when it comes to the legs. Again, I just don't feel like the legs, as you can see right there, I really don't feel like they're plugged in as well as they should. But let's go ahead and finish off the rest of Bane. After all, we've gotten this far, after all. We're going to use these rather large-looking pegs. Excessive, I would say, perhaps. But of course, it's just the necessary means involved to get those hands in place. Now, it always seems to be the case that with this Bane so far, I've had to do a lot of this off-camera. I think I've got the one hand in. I may have to add just a little bit of extra TLC to get that properly in place. We'll go ahead and do the exact same thing on the other side. Yeah, I think I'm going to probably do a little bit more forcing of that afterwards. And then last but certainly not least, we can go ahead and take the head sculpt, which again just plugs into place, relies on just this little post, this ball joint post, and we're just going to plug in the head. Doesn't seem like it almost stays properly in place, like it seems so easy, you would think, on paper, and yet I'm having a difficult time actually getting it in place. That's basically Bane for the time being. We're going to work on this. We're going to work on this, get this going a little bit better than what we're actually doing. But it gives you at least an idea of what a finished Bane will look like. Of course, the only other thing other than this to do is to add the Scarecrow on his back, as of course it is from the comics, Last Night on Earth. I'm liking the look of that Bane. I will say, just right out the gate, looking at what I've done so far, pat myself on the back, that I've succeeded somewhat putting Bane complete and put together. I will say I think he's missing a whole lot of paint applications. I feel like they probably could have really enhanced the experience of having those veins really pop out on the figure. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We'll just move the Bane off for the time being. The black hole can basically just babysit the Bane for the time being. Let's have a look at the accessories that come included with Batman. Starting first, go ahead and pick up the trading card. There, of course, is Batman, taken from Batman Last Night on Earth. A very interesting read, especially if you do like a severed head Joker talking all the while. You can see there he is holding the almost little Joker lantern that he carries around with him. Really nice detailing on this one. Spin this around to the back. It gives you all the stats necessary to know what's going on here with Last Night on Earth. A brief read-up down below that I actually did read at the beginning of this review. Source is Batman Last Night on Earth #1 Comics 2019. Real name is Bruce Wayne. Height, 6'2", and weight, a very lean, mean 210 pounds. Still like these trading cards. I know I mention it frequently in all these reviews, but I always like holding on to these. I've got them all so far in a binder with all my other trading cards. To come included also with Batman, he comes with the same basic display stand, and I'm not saying that in a negative way at all. I just appreciate the fact that we do get ourselves display stands. I've thrown this to the wind a couple of times in the past, but ask yourself, how many companies actually are doing display stands? There's not very many at all. And even if it is the same stand that we get with all the other releases, I appreciate the fact that we actually do get ourselves a display stand, because like I said, it doesn't happen very often at all. Also, it comes in handy as well if you want to be putting these guys in more interesting poses than simply just having them standing like this. I know it's not the most exciting of things. Batman comes included with a club. A little small portable club that you can see. It's all simply just molded in black plastic. But I do like the fact that there's all these little indentations to it. I mean, yes, they could have simply just phoned this in and just sculpted a straight out club, a little billy club. You can see, I like the fact that they've added just a little bit of detailing to it. It kind of even looks like it has a little bit of a grain finish to it. But again, like there's no additional paint to it. It's literally just molded black plastic. You can fit this in either one of his hands. Generally, I do like to put the club on this side of Batman, which I'll show you guys in a second. Before we do that, let's have a look at, of course, the main coming attraction. The main thing I'm sure that would be the one thing you'd want to display the figure with, and that is the severed head of Joker. And boy, does that ever look good. They've done a neat thing by, if you look at it on the back, basically just airbrushed across an orange paint. And as you can see on the front, basically this would have all been clear plastic. And then they've just very conveniently just airbrushed the outer area so you can still see very well the clown prints of crime inside. That's really nice. I like the dark, grimy looking teeth that they painted on him. He's not removable, so there's no available means to remove this. I guess you could probably pry this off. But then I asked myself the question, why would I want to do that? Does this actually come off? I haven't even tried to do this myself. I think I'm just going to leave it. It seems like it's something that should just be staying in place. I'm going to leave it for the time being. If there has been people, you've got this figure for yourself, and succeeded in prying this off, let me know. But obviously the whole purpose of this is to be displayed, contained inside this, so Batman can actually carry it around with him. Speaking of carrying it around, let's have a look at Batman's hands. Now, the hands are basically the exact same. There's not too much that's changed between the two. They're basically just boiling down to gripping hands. So I've just decided to put the Joker on this one side. The plastic, I will say, is slightly denser than what I was expecting. So when it comes to getting the handle in place, you really have to kind of pry to get it in there. But it does succeed in holding it. Of course, Batman can carry around the Joker wherever he's going. At the very beginning of this review, I kind of had it where Batman's looking at it just like that. I think that would look really neat on a display as well. Just kind of get his head slightly twisted and have him literally just arguing back and forth with Joker. I think that would be so cool of a display. That's probably what I'm going to end up doing. And then, of course, you can go ahead and take the billy club, fit this into his hand, obviously go by the handle. Handle is the best way to display this. And I'm just twisting it. Now, you could do the opposite. You could just force it down in between the grooved area between his fingers and his thumb. But I find it's just a lot easier to twist it in place. There we go. Just like that. And you got there Batman carrying around both the club, both the Joker, trying to find out a little bit more about what happened to his past. This is a case where certainly I would feel like if the figure didn't come included with the Joker, I would be somewhat disappointed, because obviously this is the thing that Batman is known for having, the fact he's carrying around the Joker with him. So it's a nice little touch that McFarlane Toys actually threw that in there, and a great way to display the figure when you pick this one up for yourself. Let's get a closer look now at Batman, who obviously, as you can see, is wearing the Arkham Asylum straitjacket. The way that they've done it, certainly in the comics, I'm not going to praise McFarlane Toys necessarily. They've just translated the character from the comics exceptionally well. But I do like in the comics that he actually used the straps of his straitjacket sort of as a makeshift cape. That looks really good in the comics and looks really good here, neat in the figure. Now, they're individual straps, but they're sort of paired together. You can see that they're still sort of attached to the top, and they're attached in the same way that you would expect to see them on a straitjacket. If you even lift them up, you can even see how they would have attached on the interior of the straitjacket. And that, again, is a really neat looking touch. Could they have added a little bit of coloring actually on the buckled areas? Probably they could. But again, I just love the fact that they actually sculpted that in there. That's a really neat looking touch. On the front, of course, you've got the W there. We can look at his head sculpt. And the head sculpt is a crude, thrown together, as you can see, bat cowl. Very effective. Doesn't really have much in the way of paint, really relying only on the black. I guess they probably could have added just a little bit of blue highlight in there, so it would break up so much of that black plastic sculpting. The eyes, as you can see, triangular painted eyes, painted generally quite well. I'm not really sure, honestly, when it comes to the skin tone on his face. I would say it almost has a bit of a sicklier yellow tint to it. You can see that it's got a few little imperfections. I'm going to assume that's an imperfection, not necessarily a scar. There looks like a few little places possibly where the chin rubbed up against the collar. This is something you're going to have to worry about. You don't want to bring Batman's head too far into the area of the collar and start rotating it back and forth. I feel like it's awfully close quarters. If you're rubbing it back and forth like that, you could run the risk of starting to chip off that paint, which possibly may have started already happening. But the detailing on this is really good. You can see how the straps, basically he's just literally made the cowl out of what he could find. And boy, does that ever look good. Also like the detailing that they also incorporated into the straitjacket. There's some serious texturing going on here. You can see that there's little markings, little indentations and holes actually in the fabric, especially when you can see here on the side. They've actually sculpted in places that have been cut that look like then they've been attempted at least to be repaired. Little stitched in areas. I really like that. Again, you can see all the little imperfections on there. Now, he's thrown together himself a makeshift utility belt. One of the things he does have in the utility belt is a hole. Now, you can go ahead and grab that club that we looked at before. And the club does fit in there. Not as tight as I thought it would have been. It probably helps a little bit that the grooves in the handle sort of helps to kind of keep it in place. I think if this was a smoother handle, it'd probably be more susceptible to sliding out. But it's just got the right level of friction to it that it does, like I said, do a good job of staying in place. Things that I find a bit problematic on this particular figure is when you get down to these legs. While I like this is all nice sculpted plastic, and I don't really think it relies very much on paint at all. There are a few places like the straps, for example, that had to be painted in, but all the rest of this is just plastic. The strapping, for the most part, is pretty good. There are a little few areas here on the sides where it doesn't look like it's come in completely painted successfully. But then, unfortunately, when you get to the legs, I'm not really sure what they've done to the legs here. The legs almost come across like it's a different plastic altogether. While this is a beige plastic, I feel like down below they've almost used a darker plastic and attempted to brush over top of it the lighter color. I'm not really sure why they didn't simply just use this color of plastic right here. And if they did want to add a little bit of detailing to it, maybe then they could have just gone in and brushed on the darker color, because it seems like they've actually done the reverse of that. They've taken the darker plastic and then they've brushed over top of it the lighter color. I think the intended plan was they did that so you could see all the wrinkles and kind of the detailing on the pants. But the opposite I find ends up resulting here. When you're looking at it, it almost looks like it's just plastic that hasn't been painted properly. That again, I think I would have gone the route of using this plastic and then just painted the darker colors brushed over top of it. That's just my own personal opinion. Of course, you can see down below is his boots. Now I'm guessing, being the way that the boots are attached, they're not separate pieces. This is a separate piece, but the top half of the boot is molded black plastic. I gotta think the way that it looks, it doesn't look like it's been painted on. So I'm wondering if the legs are all this dark black plastic. And then they've gone on there and painted on this lighter beige color. And the problem also is that it doesn't even match the coloring for the top of his straitjacket. Whereas you can see when you're looking at it, this is very much just a matte finished plastic. And yet down below, the coloring that they ended up using for his lower half almost comes across more like a shinier coloring of that. And it does almost, I mean, when you look at it, it doesn't quite match. It doesn't quite gel, I find. I do like the detailing done to the boots. I will praise them for that. Of course, the unavoidable is the fact that there's that hinge joint in between the foot and the top of the boot. That allows the toe articulation, but unfortunately, obviously, because the peg is slightly shinier, it does look like it's very much cut up, like they cut the boot in half and left a little gap in the middle. When it comes to the figure, we're going to talk about his articulation in a second, but I will say, Batman's arms are really loose. I haven't spent a lot of time actually taking these out of the packaging. Generally, when it comes to these figure reviews, I like to spend maybe a good half hour to an hour spending a little bit of time with them so I really have a good understanding of what I really want to talk about. But I haven't really been very, very violent or very aggressive with moving these joints. And yet, unfortunately, getting out of the packaging, I find his arms are just really loose. His legs aren't so bad, and his boots aren't so bad. They're a little loose in the ankle, but I find not as loose as his arms. It's really disappointing the fact that they are so loose as they are for what little time I've actually spent with the figure. So let's talk about the posability on Batman here. His head rotates back and forth. It is on a ball joint after all, so it can move up and down and back and forth this way. Again, I would go back to a point I stressed earlier. If you have the head lower down, I would try my best probably not to rub it back and forth like this on the interior of the collar, simply just because they probably used the black plastic and then painted the flesh tone over top of that. If you have it too low like this and you start moving it back and forth, I feel there's the risk of rubbing off that paint or chipping it off. I don't know if already a little bit of that happened right down below here, but I certainly don't want to continue that any further than I have to. So I would say when it comes to rotating the head back and forth, if you do want to have his head looking quite low, I'd probably rotate it to where you want to have it first and then drop the head down. Just my own personal opinion. Then his upper torso is on a ball joint. It's clean enough that, as you can see, because the plastic is the same coloring underneath, that it doesn't look too jarring. Obviously, the big problem is going to be the strap. The strap's not going to line up with itself when you start rotating his torso, but it's really unavoidable. The only other thing that they could have done is had this as a separate plastic piece and just attached it similar to a belt. But I understand. They're not going to want to go through the full effort of actually molding this as a separate piece. It just doesn't make any sense. Have it molded to the torso instead and just deal with the fact that, yeah, the strap isn't going to line up when you start rotating his torso. But I will say, like, there's a good amount of posability on that top torso piece. Down, up, and back and forth. The legs split out. Actually, before we talk about that, talk about the arms. He does have the socket joint that we've seen with all the other DC Multiverse releases. And because of that, it allows the arms to kind of hinge forward in more than what you normally would be able to pull off. You can see right there, the way that that socket joint, see, allows for a little bit of additional posability hinging both out and also hinging further inward. Just a shame, really, that his arms are so loose. I don't feel like they should have been this loose right out the gate. It does have a hinge joint in the arm there, the shoulder, so you can hinge the joint out. You can, of course, rotate the arm all by itself. He has a swivel at the bicep, a double hinge on the elbow. Get that going right there. Sometimes, too, when you're looking at biceps on figures, they could be sometimes so big that you don't really effectively make use of both the hinge joints. In the case here of Batman, that bicep joint is just the right shape, and it could also be the fact that they kind of curved it inward to allot for that little bit of extra clearance that it needs in order to double bend the elbow. I like that. I like that a lot. Then, of course, for his hands, the hands rotate all the way around. You can hinge them back and forth. He only has one pair of hands, and that's currently the hands, obviously, that you're looking at on the figure. Okay, let's talk about his legs. Putting the paint aside, because, again, that's still one issue that I feel is really the worst aspect of this figure. He does have hinge joints in the legs. You can get almost a full splits on Last Night on Earth Batman. You can also move his legs forward and back this way. He has a swivel basically at the top cut where that swivels back and forth ever so slightly on that ball joint. He has a double hinge on the knees. Now, again, when you're looking at this figure, now, I had mentioned earlier that he used black plastic. Something I've really failed to really mention is the fact when you look at the hinge joints on the inside, you can also see the interior of the plastic. So it literally is the same plastic color, maybe a little shinier plastic, granted, but it's obviously not a darker painted plastic. So I'm not really sure why specifically they washed it the way that they did. I mean, obviously, again, looking at the figure now, yeah, I said that they were darker using plastic, but clearly they were using like that more beige colored plastic. I really don't understand why they had to go the choices that they did when shining up, using a shinier paint to wash over top of it. The end result, again, is it looks like it's unfinished plastic, unfinished paint on plastic. Needless to say, his feet go forward and back. You can rock those back and forth. And Last Night on Earth Batman also has the toe articulation as well. Getting things all wrapped up here, let's go ahead and get Joker back into his hand. Again, to do that, you're just going to take the handle and just pry it in between the fingers until finally he gets a full grip on it. For me, when it comes to displaying the figure, I'm going to go ahead and grab the display stand also while I'm out, just to ensure that he's going to be standing up for the rest of this review. When it comes to displaying Batman for myself, I'm most definitely going to be displaying it in such a way it kind of looks like he's having a conversation with the Joker. And of course, I can throw the Billy Club in there after the fact. Overall, he's a good-looking figure. He's a little loose on the joints, which is unfortunate, especially immediately getting it out of the packaging. I don't feel like the joints should be as loose like this, because if they had retooled the sculpted arms, for example, from a previous released figure, you can understand that perhaps there would be mold degradation and resulting in loose joints. But because this figure, I would imagine, is using brand new molded pieces right from the get-go, it doesn't really make any sense whatsoever why he has such loose arm joints, specifically in the shoulder area. The only thing other than that I'm not really so crazy about is the paint that they applied to the legs. Of course, mention going back to that point that they did use that now beige plastic. I don't understand why they had to wash it the way that they did. The end result is the lower legs looking like it's unfinished paint, where really a second coat was really much needed. The Last Night on Earth is definitely a fun read, so I recommend if you have a little bit of time on your hands and you enjoy the idea of a post-apocalyptic world similar to something like Mad Max. I know everybody got on board the post-apocalyptic storyline after Mad Max, specifically Road Warrior. Do yourself a service, spend a little bit of time and read The Last Night on Earth. It's rather interesting, especially the interactions that he has with Joker. Speaking of the Joker, a nice touch is the fact that they included the Joker for Batman to carry around. Obviously, this would be a case where if you're going to be releasing straight jacket Batman, you would have to include the Joker. It would be so absent. A big void would be left behind if they hadn't included it. And I think the Joker turned out pretty good as well. I'm not sure you can actually remove Joker from his canister. It does almost kind of look like it's a separate piece, but in this review, I really didn't want to start prying it open in case I ended up actually breaking it. I don't want to be breaking things in reviews. But it is a nice touch, and certainly the way I'm going to display the figure. Of course, the points talking about the straps on his back are more so to the original detailing that the character had in the comics. But I will say, faithfully recreated here in the figure from McFarlane Toys. I do like the touches of having the softer plastic straps on the back of his torso, serving as almost a makeshift cape, and I've always liked that design of Last Night on Earth Batman. Things that are a little iffy on this particular figure, and again, it more so probably stems from the one I got, rather than I'm sure everybody who's picked this figure up for yourself, is the fact that his joints and his shoulders are really loose. Now, of the two, I would much rather accept loose joints in his arms rather than loose joints in his legs. Loose joints in his legs would cause the figure to have difficulty standing. Loose joints in arms, if anything, it may have some difficulty with him actually holding the Joker upright, kind of like what I'm doing here in Final Looks. But it shouldn't be as loose as it is, and I can't strike it necessarily for that, because I'm sure, again, it's only a case of my figure, because I'm lucky enough to have gotten the one figure out there that had loose joints in his arms, but it really shouldn't have had so loose of a joint in his arms so quickly out of getting it out of the packaging. Of course, the other thing I mentioned already, and I don't want to beat this dead horse to death even further, is the fact that the paint on the plastic of the legs, which initially at the beginning of this review I did say was a darker plastic, obviously it's using a beige plastic, and yet the coloring that they applied to it almost seems almost the reverse, like they were using a darker plastic for the legs and then washed over top of it the beige color. The end result is, again, it kind of looks like a second coat of paint was required in order to give the legs more finished look. I mean, maybe they could have even gone a darker color, because I think he's got slightly darker legs than he does have the upper torso. So maybe they could have darkened it a little bit. But either way, the leg sheen, because a little shinier than the rest of the plastic, and the fact that the way that they've applied it really looks unfinished to me. The rest of the figure, though, turned out fantastic. And certainly when it comes to displaying this figure on my shelf, I'm going to be displaying it with the Joker in his hand, kind of like he's having a conversation with it going on right now. Have you picked up this figure for yourself? If so, let me know down below in the comments section what you guys think of the Last Night on Earth Batman. Do you have, by the way, loose joints in his arms? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe I'm the only one. I'm probably the only one. Also, if you're new to this channel and you're liking all the content you're seeing, because we do a lot of content, when you think about it, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're doing 2 videos a day. That's unheard of. But there's always new content for you to be checking out. So I would assure you, if you do want to guarantee yourself that you're seeing all the content as it's hitting the interweb, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. You can turn the bell notification on as your way of telling YouTube that, yes, in fact, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, but you also want to get those friendly 411s when new videos are popping up on this channel. Just know, come back to this channel Monday to Friday, 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when we're checking out new stuff. Speaking of new stuff, of course, we're going to still have to look at Bane. His review will be coming up shortly. It may involve me taking a little bit of a small hiatus between this review and the review of Bane, just to properly ensure that all the things are plugged into place properly. I'm crossing the T's, I'm dotting the I's, and I'm making sure that head isn't going to fall off. Wish me luck. Lots of stuff coming your way, guys, so as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.